This first part is just about Gilgamesh. Right? He had seen everything, had experienced all emotions, from exaltation to despair, had been granted a vision into the great mystery, the secret places, the primeval days before the flood. He had journeyed to the edge of the world and made his way back, exhausted but whole. And this is a sculpture of Gilgamesh. It's a modern sculpture, it's not an ancient one, at the University of Sydney. Right? But this gives you a good idea of him. He's like holding, he's a giant, right? This is a lion. Okay. Here's a few more ancient depictions of Gilgamesh. You can see where the modern one came from, right? This is Gilgamesh fighting the bull of heaven, which happens in the story. And then over here, we have Gilgamesh and Kidu fighting Humbaba in the Cedar forest. Okay. Now, this is our setting. Again, sort of just a modern sort of imagination of what it looks like. I'll read it. Uruk, which no city on earth can equal. See how its ramparts gleam like copper in the sun. Climb the stone staircase, more ancient than the mind can imagine. Approach the Iana temple, sacred to Ishtar, a temple that no king has equaled in size or beauty. Walk on the wall of Uruk. Follow its course around the city. Inspect its mighty foundations. Examine its brickwork, right? How masterfully it is built. Observe the land that it encloses. The palm trees, the gardens, the orchards, the glorious palaces and temples, the shops, right? The marketplaces, the houses, the public squares. Now find the cornerstone and under it the copper box that is marked with his name. Unlock it, open the lid, take out the tablet of lapis lazuli. Read how Gilgamesh suffered all and accomplished all. Nice. This blue stone here, this is lapis lazuli. Okay, and you're going to see this word again and again and again. Start here. Let's start with Gilgamesh and just trying to understand him as a character, right? I've highlighted some of the main sort of key words for us here. Make sure a little bit bigger. He's described as a wild bull all the time. Incredibly important, he's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. And this is repeated over and over and over again. He's 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, right? His father was a king who became a god, right? So he's human who became a god. And then his mother is a goddess, right? So most, of his divinity, his divine side, comes from his mother. And parents play a big role in this story. Though they're like gods, these humans kind of go to their gods just like a child goes to their parents, complains, somebody's been making fun of them and stuff. Now here, we have the story about Gilgamesh, how powerful he is. He opens up mountain passes, digs wells on slopes, crosses the vast ocean, sailed to the rising sun in search of eternal life. Right? And once he found Utnapishtim. Now this name comes up right away. So we got to remember, this is an important person. Utnapishtim, the man who survived the great flood and was made immortal. So this story tells a tale of a flood that covers the whole earth and a man named Utnapishtim and his family and his wife, right, get a bunch of animals, build a big boat, and survive the flood. All right, and who does that sound like? Noah, right? We've heard this story before. No, right? Noah and the great ark, right, found in the Bible. And remember, Gilgamesh was written 1,000 years before, right? The earliest record of the written Bible, right? So I mentioned this last class, but when this Gilgamesh tablets were discovered it was quite a controversy. Some people were like, this is amazing. Like, it's proof that the flood really happened. And many people have written about it, in ancient history. And other people felt it challenged the Bible as a divine word of God, like as if it was completely original, right? That the Bible should have been the first one to speak of the flood. So, and it's still a debate, right? And that's, for the longest time, Gilgamesh only got attention for this flood aspect and not the whole story that we're reading. Okay, so a little bit more about Gilgamesh. He says, I alone rule, supreme among mankind, right? He's huge, like a giant, I think like twice as tall as everyone else in the city. He's handsome, radiant, perfect. Right? The city is his possession. He owns it, right? Again, he's a wild bull. And this is what he does, right? He takes the son from his father and crushes him. Takes the girl from her mother and uses her. The warrior's daughter, the young man's bride, he uses her. No one dares to oppose him. Now, this goes to also his historical fact. It's called first rights. And it was when the king, like if two people got married, the king was allowed to sleep with the woman first. Right? It's called first rights. It did happen, right? Awful. But Gilgamesh is doing this. And now is this, and he's just crushing the men, right? How do the people of Uruk feel about this? Right. Yeah, they're terrified of him. And what do they do? No, I mean, so clearly they're not happy about it. They're terrified of this man. Now, the people of Uruk do something, right? Exactly. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so think when we think about plot, right? It's like what is going to happen to really get the story going, right? It's the people of Uruk, right, who complain or they pray, right? Pray to Heavenly Father. Gilgamesh, noble as he is, splendid as he is, has exceeded all bounds. Right? The people suffer from his tyranny. The people cry out, and then it repeats. Right? He takes the son from his father and crushes him. He takes the girl from her mother and uses her. Right? The warrior's daughter, and so on. So they're complaining to the gods. Right? Help us! Oh my gosh, help us! And we have this lovely creation story, creation moment here, that Anu heard them, right? He nodded his head. And then to the goddess, mother of creation, he called out and said, Aruru, you are the one who created humans. Now go and create a double for Gilgamesh. A double, right? Now this is a really cool word, especially in literature, a double. We find in lots of stories that there's the main hero, and then there's another character in the story that we call the double. It's kind of like it's the double is different than the hero. It's a different person, but it has qualities that mirror the hero. And it gives the hero somebody to sort of play with and have a back and forth. They're not the antagonist exactly. They're not the villain, right? They're the double. And so we see that Gilgamesh and Enkidu are very similar in so many ways. Oh yeah, sidekicks can be like doubles, right? In like superhero stuff. What's up? They can be doppelgangers, right? They might look alike as well. They might not look alike too, right? I would say doppelgangers are always doubles, right? If you have a story and the character meets somebody else that's like looks exactly like them, it's like double. It's a double, right? But it might be something like just in their personality, in their goals, in their intentions, things like that. So Next time you watch a movie, keep an eye out for a double. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, yeah. That's the biggest thing. I mean, they're like physically almost identical. I mean, maybe they look a little different, right? But I mean, like their height, their muscle mass, right? Their power. Except Gilgamesh is just a little bit stronger, right? As we'll see. Yeah. So his second self is another way. The double is his second self, right? Create a new hero to put them at balance, and a double will often give balance to the hero, so the main hero, so that Uruk has peace. Okay. Beautifully, she pinches off some clay, right, and makes Enkidu or Enkidu or Enkidu, right? It's I've heard it pronounced all three different ways. So what's also cool about this is, remember, this story we're reading, it was written on clay, right? So these characters, this story was created on clay, right? And so the god similarly uses clay to create human. Shapes it to her idea, fashions a man, and Kidu the brave. So we have a physical description of Enkidu. Hair covered his body. Hair grew thick on his head and hung down to his waist like a woman's hair. He roamed all over the wilderness, naked, far from the cities of men, ate grass with gazelles, and when he was thirsty, he drank clear water from the water holes, kneeling beside the antelope and deer. All right, so he's this, what's the word? Feral, like nature boy, right? Lives with the wolves, grown up by the wolves and the antelope and deer. Does he remind you of any other characters? Tarzan, definitely. Yeah, I thought of Tarzan too, right? Yeah, he has this primitive, primordial, like early man kind of thing. Does he remind you, people, of anyone else? I thought of Mowgli. Do you know who Mowgli is? From the Jungle Book. Yeah, Mowgli from the Jungle Book. And also Adam, right? Again, from sort of the first man. Of course, he's not the first man in this world, but created as a part of another character. And he's like Adam in the sense that he lives in this nature world, like Eden, right? Okay, at peace with the animals and stuff like this. So, okay. So one day, a human, a trapper, saw him. This trapper runs back to Gilgamesh and says he's there. And Gilgamesh, what Gilgamesh says is, go to the temple of Ishtar and ask for a woman named Shamhat, right? And she's a priestess, but sort of this like a sex worker priestess, all right? And this is a real thing, right? A real occupation back then. And so she's, masterful in the love arts, in the way it's written here. And they tell Shamhat to go into the forest and let her use her love arts, and nature will take its course, right? And then we can bring this wild man to the civilization. Okay, so she goes out there, finds him, and he finds her, and for 7 days, so 6 nights and 7 days, right? They make love, right? Have sex. Constantly, the whole time, a week long, right? We see this number 7 happen many times throughout the story. So remember that 7, this is the first time it approaches. And Kidu is just like enraptured, right, by her, and she by him as well, right? Now, what happens afterward, right? Here, at last, he stood up and walked toward the water hole to rejoin the animals. But the gazelles saw him and scattered, right? The antelope and deer bounded away. He tried to catch up, but his body was exhausted. His life force was spent, right? And we know animals, right? Like smell is such an important thing, right? And so that's how they communicate on so many levels. And so Enkidu clearly smells like human now, right? After 7 days with Shamhat. So he cannot connect, right, in any way with these animals anymore. And then, like you mentioned, yeah, I mean, and his body is physically exhausted. He doesn't have that kind of energy anymore. He's already becoming human. Right? He was more animal before, and now already he's more human. And this is my favorite part. Okay. Now, as he walked, he knew that his mind had somehow grown larger. He knew things now that an animal can't know. Right? This is incredible. His mind had gotten bigger, like his brain grew in some way. And so we know this, like, this priestess, right? We have to say, it was not just sex. Something, what people say, just sex or merely sex. It was much deeper than that. This was a spiritual transformation as well. So this is happening on many levels, that Enkidu is changing and transforming and growing to become human. And it's knowledge that she gives him, right? Not just sex. So that's got to be like clear in here. It's both physical and spiritual. Now, of course, then this is the end of this book one. Enkidu realizes, well, okay, I guess now I have to go to Uruk, and he asks to be taken to the city. Right? He hears about Gilgamesh, and he decides that he will challenge him, because he's the mightiest, right? I am the man who can make the world tremble. I am supreme. So and Gilgamesh would say the same thing, right? So they go there, and she agrees. I love this, Shamhat says, you who are still so ignorant of life, right? I will show you Gilgamesh, the mighty king, the hero destined for both joy and grief. So she has also this motherly-like, or just adult-like relationship where Enkidu is like the child. He still does not know much of anything in the world, and he has to be brought up. Okay, just skip ahead a little bit. Okay, yeah, and so at the end of the book, of course, they make love again, because it was great, I guess. So book two, this is really cool, right? This is how we become human, right? It's a story about what defines a human. How is a human different than an animal? These kind of questions. Shamhat gave Enkidu one of her robes, and he put it on, taking his hand, and she led him, again, like a child, to some shepherd's huts. So she's clothing him, right? That's a very definitive human characteristic. We wear clothes, right? Most of the time. So then Shamhat said, go ahead, Enkidu. Look, I love this. It's like, this is food, right? We humans eat and drink this, right? Warily, he tasted the bread. I love that too, warily. Like, he's afraid of bread, right? The most courageous man. They give him bread, and he's like, oh, I don't know about this. He ate a piece, then he ate a whole loaf, then ate another, right? And then he drank 7 pitchers of beer. I know. Yeah. Well, you got to start, what do they call beer? Liquid bread, right? It's like wheat, right? So maybe step 1 is bread. Then he graduated to beer. His heart grew light. His face glowed, and he sang out with joy. And then another very human thing, he had his hair cut, right? He washed and he rubbed sweet oil into his skin and became fully human. Nice. Now, let's look at this already. Just to start to apply it, sorry, let me get this. Okay. Already in Kidu, if we just think about in Kidu's story, we know what his known familiar world is, right? In his beginning, he's born or created, right, by this pinch of clay. And his known familiar world is what? Exactly. The forests, the animals, the gazelles, drinking in the water hole, running around with them, stuff like that, right? And then there's a call to adventure. Something just interrupts his known familiar world. And what is that? Yeah. The trapper doesn't really only sees him, but you can pinpoint the trapper sees him and then goes to get Shamhat, who really makes the final, like, the come hither, right, to start an adventure, right? So that's where his world really gets interrupted. Of course, Shamhat's lying there in the forest, and he says, "Who's that?" Right? There is dialogue about him refusing, right? When he's not sure, he doesn't, he goes back, he does refuse, right? He goes back to the animals, right? And they reject him, right? He doesn't, at first, he doesn't want to go to Uruk, but then he hears about Gilgamesh, right? And the aid, we could also pinpoint, it would definitely be Shamhat, right? And those, when she brings him to the villager's hut, right, to eat bread, drink beer, get, be clothed, take a shower, cut your hair, all these aids, right? This is all leading up to his departure, right? These words, the departure from the known familiar world into an unknown, unfamiliar world, right? Uruk, let's just call it Uruk, right? The unknown, unfamiliar world and whoever Gilgamesh is. And he passes this threshold. And we talked about the word threshold, the space between a door and many other things. And so the threshold, we can say, there's probably many ways to say it, but going from animal to human, you have to pass a threshold to do that. He's a virgin at the beginning, and he passes a threshold when he makes love for the first time, right? There's a threshold of just being in the forest and then the city. So we have forest, city, right? Passing a threshold. First haircut, right? That's a threshold. First taste of food, beer. So he's just passing threshold after threshold to become initiated. And this is that word here, or adventure. We'll also see this word, into civilization. Okay. Any questions or comments just on this so far? Other ideas? Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, just chime in, anytime you want, or put your emoji hand up, try to catch it. All right. So about the last thing I want to mention just for today is the end of this book. Enkidu blocks Gilgamesh from the first rites ceremony, right, where Gilgamesh will sleep with the virgin first, right, before she's married, and or the female virgin, and they fight, right? So let me just go down to the fight. The very end of book 2, Gilgamesh beats Enkidu, and Enkidu, like, respects him as the loser, right? But sees him as somebody that, has earned his respect. And so they respect each other. And it's a really great example of sportsmanship, right? Now they walk side by side, they became true friends. All right. But we do have an idea that the idea that Gilgamesh is just slightly stronger than Enkidu. Okay, so the book 3 begins, and try to stick with me. There are some parts I'm going to go really swiftly through, so we'll be skipping a lot. But if there was something in the book that really stood out to you and you want to talk about or point out, please feel free to interject, to raise your emoji hand, or something like that, okay? All right. So with book 3, we have Gilgamesh and Enkidu talking about going to fight this fierce monster, Humbaba. All right, and I love this name, Humbaba. It's a great name. And they say we must kill him and drive out evil from the world. But Humbaba isn't really pure evil in the world, okay? Now, they talk about it, and we learn that Humbaba is the forest's guardian. Right? And one of the gods, Enlil, put him there to terrify men. Right? So he's the protector of the forest. Yes, he's scary, but he's there as a guardian, as a protector. Right? He has a job, and he was put there by a god. Right? So it's like a scarecrow or something like that. They have a purpose. It's not pure evil. They have a good side to them. And they talk about this, but they decide to do it anyways. Gilgamesh taunts Enkidu, why do you speak like a coward, right? Let's do this. And he has this interesting point here. He says, why be afraid then, since sooner or later death must come, right? Let's just go risk our lives. Let's do this. So we have here already an example of Gilgamesh's point of view about death. This is what he thinks about death. It's kind of like you only live once, right? You're going to die someday, so just let's live it up, right? Let's go fight it. Let's risk our lives, and so on. And we will notice that later on, his perspective about death changes dramatically. Very soon, actually. Okay, so first Enkidu stands up and does talk to the elders of Uruk and trying to persuade the king, Gilgamesh, not to go to the Cedar Forest, not to fight the fierce monster. But we see later that eventually he caves in. Right? Gilgamesh just convinces him, and he's his friend. So he stood there in silence for a long time. At last he nodded. Gilgamesh took his hand. Because remember, like brothers, they go fight monsters hand in hand. Like children too, right? So this is interesting. Now here, Gilgamesh, before he leaves, he also, like a child, kind of like asks his mom, right, this great goddess, to help him. Okay, Ninsun, he says, Gilgamesh says, dear mother, great goddess, help me in this. Give me your blessing so I can come back victorious. Ninsun, mother, she climbs to her roof and sends out a prayer. Say, Lord of heaven, you have granted my son beauty and strength and courage. Why have you burdened him with a restless heart? And then she asks Shamash, the sun god, right, the glorious sun, delight of the gods. And I love the word delight here. It means of light, right? That's what delight means. Illuminator of the world, because he's the sun god, right? Asks him, so when when Gilgamesh and his dear friend Enkidu arrive, stir up strong winds against Humbaba, right, to pin Humbaba, to paralyze his steps and make it easy for my son to kill him. So she's being a good parent, right? She's like, oh, I'll just make it easier for my son, and so he can win, right, and protect him, stuff like this. And we find later, right, that's exactly how they win. Right? Mom came and helped, right? Mom's prayer, right? This is exactly what happens. You can notice here, I didn't highlight it, but these words repeat. The south wind, the north wind, the east and the west, right? Storm wind, gale wind, hurricane, tornado. These words are repeated in just a moment when they're fighting Humbaba. So clearly her prayer worked, and Shamash comes to really, let them win. Okay, so they take their axes and, knives and quivers and bows, and they go off to the cedar forest. Okay, so let us leave. Let our hearts be fearless. Enkidu, because he's the man of the forest, right, goes first, right, because he knows where Humbaba lives. Okay. All right, so this book I'm going to skip over for the most part, and I told you it was optional reading. So we're just going to look at one part of it, and really what happens is it just repeats 5 times. Right? Did anyone read this in full? Oh, great. Yeah, a few of you did. It's a cool chapter, right? There's a lot of trippy dreams and like surreal imagery. But it is very repetitive. So basically all that happens is they go 400 miles and then stop and eat. Enkidu does a ritual for dreams right here. Okay. And then his ritual, I love it. He makes a magic circle of flour around Gilgamesh. And every night Gilgamesh wakes up with a nightmare, right? A horrible dream. And this is cool. Okay, so let's just look at one of them. So he has one dream, a huge mountain looms, so huge that we were as small as flies. Right? Then the mountain fell down on top of us. So this is his dream. And a good example of imagery. I mean, this is 2.5 lines. I see it. I really see it in my imagination. And then this part where the mountain fell down on top of us. It's very dreamlike. I almost imagine it like 2-dimensional, like it's cardboard all of a sudden, right? Or a stone wall might be more accurate. The mountain falling down on top of them. Now, Gilgamesh thinks it's a nightmare. He wakes up, and what does Enkidu do? It's a tongue twister. He interprets the dream as a favorable dream, right? He says, no, it's a good dream. That isn't a bad dream. And what he does, he reinterprets it. And so this is exactly how symbols work, right? Symbols are made of 2 parts, right? We just have an image. We just have a huge mountain looming, so huge that they're small as flies, and then the mountain falls down on top. This symbol, right, can be interpreted in many different ways, right? Gilgamesh interprets it negatively. Enkidu interprets it positively. Right? And it's a way to encourage his friend and say, no, these are good omens, not bad omens. Let's continue. Right? So this is the first one. It happens 5 times. Okay, it happens 5 times, and that's what I'll just skip. See, at midnight he awoke, and he sees another mountain, and it just goes on. At midnight he awoke. At midnight he awoke. So another thing to keep in mind is these old mythologies originally were orally shared, right? So people spoke them. It was oral storytelling, oratory, right, of the voice. And like music, we still do it today in music. We repeat the chorus again and again, right? And our favorite songs, they just repeat themselves again and again because they're easy to memorize that way and they're more fun. Right? And that's what's happening here. This is like the structure of music and oral storytelling. We have the same kind of chorus going on, so to speak. All right, they make it to the cedar forest. Gazing, silent, there was nothing to say. Okay, so before starting book 5 here, I have actually a picture. So this is an example of a cedar forest, right? This one's in Lebanon, which was it's northwest of ancient Uruk, right, in modern Lebanon. But in Iraq, there aren't really any cedar forests. So scholars have sort of put together that, for this scene, and they went 400 miles, 400 miles, 400 miles. The closest cedar forests to Uruk were around modern day Lebanon. So anyway, this could be kind of what it looks like. And I thought it was a good picture, give us a visual representation. Here we are at the edge of the cedar forest. And we have a similar thing happen. Suddenly Enkidu's afraid and Gilgamesh encourages him. So they really balance each other out. When one's afraid, the other one encourages. And then when the other's afraid, the other encourages. They follow the trail to Humbaba. And Humbaba comes out roaring at them. And they have a dialogue. And so this is an interesting thing. It's not a monster where you see the monster and you just have to fight the monster, right? This monster actually speaks. The monster speaks, and they have a dialogue, and they actually negotiate sort of the terms of the fight in a way, right? And Humbaba even says, you probably shouldn't fight me, not just because I'll kill you, but I'm the protector of the forest. Remember, who's going to protect the forest? And it's very violent, their language. He says, he remembers Enkidu, and if you continue, I'll slit your throats, I'll cut off your heads, I'll feed your stinking guts to the shrieking vultures and crows. And Gilgamesh backs away. He said, oh my gosh, how dreadful Humbaba's face has become. It is changing into 1,000 nightmare faces, more horrible than I can bear. Right? Now, this is a really scary image. If you get past just the words themselves and you think of what is a nightmare face with 1,000 nightmare faces, right? 1,000 faces within one. Right? It's quite scary. And many people have tried to depict, right, this image. So these are a couple ancient depictions of Gilgamesh and Enkidu fighting Humbaba in the forest. Right, here he is, Humbaba, in the center of both of them. And you can tell probably that, the artists influenced one another. I couldn't find the date of this one, actually. I know it's ancient. But this one's the 10th, 9th century. You see probably Gilgamesh and Kidu. Gilgamesh is always slightly taller, right? He's this little, slightly stronger one. And same here. And then here is the monster, Humbaba, in two different depictions. Oh, we saw that. Here is a mask of Humbaba. And I love this. This is an ancient mask from about 1800 BC, 1600, somewhere around there. This is the front of it, right? The 1,000 nightmares in his face, so depicted by all these lines. And also, what's cool, I like masks and studying, masks. And just about what's interesting of the front of the mask is the reverse side of the mask, right? Where the human places their face, or what who's hiding behind the mask. And behind the mask, we actually have inscriptions here in Akkadian cuneiform, right? Actually, it's probably Sumerian cuneiform, but it's cuneiform nonetheless. You remember the markings that are the same as our book on the back of this mask. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, I'll show you these in a second. Okay. So now they fight, of course, like two wild bulls. We see that a lot. And of course, remember, like I said, who's coming in to help? Shamash. Right? The god comes in and throws strong winds at Humbaba. The south wind, the north wind, the east and the west, storm wind, gale wind, hurricane, tornado. Same words as before, right? To pin him down and paralyze his steps. He could not move forwards, could not retreat. Gilgamesh saw it, so you got to give him credit. He did notice this happening, and he leaped upon him, held a knife to Humbaba's throat. Cool, so now they have him pinned. Right? And Humbaba said, Gilgamesh, have mercy. Now they talk, and Humbaba's trying to, ask him to spare his life. He says, I'll be your slave, give you as many cedar trees as you want, and so on and so on. Enkidu says, don't listen to him. He's trying to confuse you, right? Kill him quickly. And they talk for a while. It's like there's all this suspense that builds up. To this moment, Humbaba cries out, I curse you both. Because you have done this, may Enkidu die. May he die in great pain. May Gilgamesh be inconsolable. May his merciless heart be crushed with grief. Okay, so Humbaba curses him. And this curse, this curse comes true. All right? This is a real curse. He's not just saying it. This is exactly what happens in the rest of the story. Now, at this moment, they slaughter him and cut off his head. They slice him open, pull out his intestines. They cut off his head with its knife sharp teeth and horrible bloodshot staring eyes. And I love this moment here. A gentle rain fell onto the mountains. A gentle rain fell onto the mountains. Like after this intense, violent moment, we finally have peace. And that's beautiful. I love the repetition, the musical aspect of it again. And the peace. It's gentle all of a sudden. Okay. Now, since we got done with that, all right, this is the end of the book. They build a raft and they head home, and Gilgamesh carries Humbaba's head. I'll show you a couple modern depictions also of the fight. So these are more recent. I liked them, right? One on the left from 1996, made to look more ancient than it really is. And here they are. And I really like this depiction of Humbaba. He's very demon-like, human-like even, but especially his face. It's pretty freaky. But then this is from a more recent sort of graphic novel version, or an illustrated version. And I thought this was pretty cool too. To me, this is more nightmarish. And when I myself imagine Humbaba, it wasn't in human form with the same size. I mean, he was like massive. He was kind of gross and disgusting. Not so cartoony in my mind, but I thought this was a pretty good one. So let's see. Let's look at, so book 6. I'm going to go pretty swiftly through. One major thing happens in it. So when they get back from doing this, of course, they're like celebrities. I mean, everyone already knew them, but they just accomplished something big, right? And the goddess Ishtar, she sees Gilgamesh. And remember that the temple, the main temple in Uruk, is Ishtar's temple. And she sees him and she says, "Come here, right? Come here, Gilgamesh. Marry me, give me your luscious fruits, be my husband, be my sweet man. And I'll give you a chariot of lapis lazuli." Remember, that was the blue stone. Right? And she offers everything to him. And she's a goddess. She can bless everything he owns and will just give him gifts for the rest of his life. And Gilgamesh, what does he do? He refuses. And he cites a few examples of like her last boyfriends, so to speak, her last husbands, all right? And he reminds her that, remember, there was that one beautiful boy, Tammuz. You sent him to the underworld. You loved that one bright speckled bird. You broke his wings, right? That lion, you dug 7 pits for him and he fell. There was that stallion you married, right? And you doomed him to whips and spurs. The shepherd who had baked bread for you, he became a wolf, right? And so he's all of these examples he has. Some guy that she turned into a toad. And why would my fate be any different? If I too became your lover, you would treat me as cruelly as you treated them. And of course, she's furious that she was rejected. No one else rejected her, right? And so what does she do? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, similar to, a girl goes runs to her father, right, and says, right, complains to her father, that she was insulted, and says, "Dad, you take care of him, right? Go. What is the word I'm trying to think of? Sort of redeem my honor, something like that." And I mentioned last class too, right? Often, all the characters here, and even some of the gods too, they're like the parents of our heroes and heroines. They're often treated as some sort of a kind of parental figure. And the elders, right, are the parents. So she goes to her father, "Father, I beg you, give me the bull of heaven just for a little while." Like she's trying to borrow a car or something like that in our days, right? "I want to bring it to the earth. I want to kill that liar Gilgamesh and destroy his palace." And the father's like, "Yeah, okay, all right, yeah, sure, take the bull of heaven." And he adds, he's like, "But if you take care of it," right? Also like a girl, growing up and getting her first pet or something like that. She wants a puppy. She wants a kitty. The parent is like, "Okay, but do you have enough food for it? Are you going to take good care of it?" And she says, yes. I have more than enough for 7 years. So he's like, "Okay, you can have the bull of heaven." And this is the second monster that Gilgamesh and Enkidu, right, get to battle. And there's ancient depictions of that as well. It's just two of them, right? So here, I believe this is Gilgamesh and destroying the bull of heaven. He's stepping on the nose and the back and like breaking its back and ripping it apart like they do in the story. And then here it's both of them fighting. This is from the same cylinder as another picture we saw. And again, they're larger because they're the heroes, right? And the bull of heaven doesn't really look like a bull. It kind of has a human head and wings and so on. But scholars identified this as the bull of heaven. Right? Okay. So, right, they fight the bull, seize it by the tail and set his foot on its haunch back. Gilgamesh skillfully, like a butcher, strode up and thrust his knife between its shoulders and the base of its horn, and they had killed the bull of heaven. And of course, Ishtar is furious, and she goes back to her father and says, "Now the brute has killed his own punishment." I love that line. He killed his own punishment. They laugh. Enkidu laughs and rips off one of the bull's thighs and throws it at Ishtar's face. All right, so they're like humiliating her for trying to kill them. And she did try to kill them. She failed. And they humiliate her. Of course, their lives just go on. Right? And they celebrate. Right? They celebrate. Return to the palace hand in hand. And, they sing songs and party, basically, after all of that. And later, when the warriors were stretched out asleep, Enkidu had a terrifying dream. And when he woke up, he said to Gilgamesh, "Dear friend, why are the great gods assembled?" And this is very ominous. Right? It's foreshadowing sort of bad events to come. Right? Again, Enkidu has a dream, and why are the great gods assembled? As if the gods above them are coming together to talk about what to do. Okay. So we're already on book 7, or 5, 6, 7. Yep. And 7 and 8 were also optional chapters. So you could go through them. Basically, 5, 6, 7. And it is important. Enkidu gets sick and then he dies. Right? To sum it all up. He gets sick. He has nightmares. And Gilgamesh is a good friend. And just like before, Gilgamesh says, like, "No, these aren't nightmares. Let's interpret them positively. You're okay. You're okay." And he's not okay. Right? He's got these bad dreams. Gilgamesh, though it sounds bad, this dream may be a good omen. Right? A good symbol. And let's see. I mentioned this before, but Enkidu, he's getting even sicker, and he blames Shamhat, right, the woman that sort of taught him what it was to be human, right, and brought him into the society, right? And he blames her, right? May all this be your reward. All this, he says really awful stuff about Shamhat, just like terrible things about like an amazing woman in his life. Like, and he says these terrible things about her. And Shamash defends her, right? And we met Shamash before, right? Defends Shamhat and says, Enkidu, right? Wasn't it she who gave you fine bread fit for a god and fine beer fit for a king, who clothed you in a glorious robe and gave you splendid Gilgamesh as your intimate friend? Right? You should be thanking her. All the good things that happened to you in your life were because of her. Right? And so this is very a typical thing too, right? Of this man sort of scapegoating a woman of all his own problems. And he's scapegoating, blaming her, right, for all his own issues. Okay. A common theme we see in literature and societies up till today. We see it way back then. Okay. All right, he gets sick, he gets worse, and then he dies. He did death rattle, and this is quite beautiful. Gilgamesh moaned like a dove. Right? This is the first time we've seen Gilgamesh so weak, right? Like a little beautiful bird. He's moaning like a dove. This imagery here, and this simile, Gilgamesh like a dove, is completely different than we saw in book 1 at the beginning. He was nothing like a dove. There's not a tiny aspect of him that could be compared to a dove. Now, he can be compared, his moaning is like a dove. He's lost his friend, his best friend. All right, and now before moving on to book 8, just want to look at this again. Let's see, bring this, we're in the center. So there are many parts in the story so far that we can identify. And remember, we start here at the top, this beginning, and we go down. Now, Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they start becoming friends in Uruk, right? And then when they depart together, right, they go to the Cedar forest, right, which is an unknown, unfamiliar world to Gilgamesh, right? So Gilgamesh crosses this threshold where he goes on an adventure, like, and the threshold here is leaving Uruk, right, to the Cedar forest with this friend, right? This is all very new for Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh has this call to adventure with this new friend. They fight, and now they depart their familiar world and go into the unknown, right? They go on an adventure together. That's exactly what they do, right? There's a test, Humbaba, right? Allies and enemies. Of course, they're allies. The enemy is this Humbaba. There's this conflict that they have. So all of these little points are happening, as we can see. Now, they return. They do return once to their known familiar world, but their whole journey isn't done yet. But they do have sort of a miniature journey. And when they come back to the known world of Uruk, right, they go on another adventure with the Bull of Heaven and fighting the Bull of Heaven. They party. And we have Gilgamesh here now. He's not quite at his lowest point yet, but he has just lost his friend, right? His very close friend. And so that's something still here. It's like we're still down here in Gilgamesh's overall journey. He's approached with this major conflict in his life. And of everything that's happened, right, this awesome new friend he just loses him. And he's moaning like a dove. And we'll see it gets worse for Gilgamesh. So he's not at his lowest point, but he's definitely suffering. Okay, so he's still on this downward curve in the narrative. Book 8 is basically Enkidu's funeral, and it kind of goes on and on. I want to just look at this one part. It's quite beautiful about, it's like a funerary speech, a speech you could give at a funeral today, right? It's talking about how the world will now mourn for Enkidu, right? May the paths that led you to the cedar forest mourn you constantly, day and night. May the elders of great walled Uruk mourn you, who gave us their blessing when we departed. May the hills mourn you and the mountains we climbed. May the pastures mourn you as their own son. May the forest we slashed in our fury mourn you. May the bear mourn you, the hyena, the panther, the leopard, jackal, deer, lion, wild bull, gazelle. May the rivers Ulaya and Euphrates mourn you. Right? It's this beautiful poem and sentiment, with memories, like, the good memories that we had together. Remember when we slashed the forest to bits, right? They will miss you. And he goes on, right? He goes on. Almost the whole chapter is this mourning. And if you got a chance to read it, that's great, right? And if you haven't, feel free to go and read it. But after the speech Gilgamesh gives, Enkidu does not answer. Gilgamesh touched his heart, but it did not beat. So he's dead. Right? Gilgamesh says he will roam the wilderness with matted hair and a lion's skin. All right, I'm just going to go forward. And at the end, after the funeral, Gilgamesh, he went out from Uruk into the wilderness with matted hair and a lion's skin. Right? Now, with the monomyth, remember, we should always be trying to pinpoint how characters are transforming, right? On really deep levels, how are they transforming? And so I just want to ask you all, how is Gilgamesh, his appearance, his demeanor, how is he different now at this point than he was at the beginning? How is he transformed? Before, he was so arrogant, right? So arrogant. And, just treated everything as his own property, a tyrant, right? But now he doesn't seem to want any of that. He's mourning. And who knew at the beginning that Gilgamesh could mourn for another person? He only cared about himself. But now he has actually felt, right, a deep love for someone else. And losing that person is intense, right? And very painful. And since they were so balanced as doubles, we talked about, they were doubles or second selves of one another. It's like he lost a part of himself when Enkidu dies. And if you've experienced, right, you could, the death of a family member, a close family member, or a close friend, right? You do feel like there's a part of yourself that is gone as well. It's like you realize that their life energy, their living life with you, was a part of your life, like an actual part of your life. And if they're not there, that part has changed. Right? And so we mourn. Right? 4,000 years ago we mourned, and still today. Okay, so this is a massively important part in Gilgamesh's journey, right? And we could identify it's another threshold, right? It might not be this threshold between worlds. He's already definitely in an unknown, unfamiliar world, but it's one of the major conflicts and a threshold he passes is this realization, right? Like, must I die too? Right? Wait, now must I be as lifeless as Enkidu? Right? And this really almost, in a way, sets him out on another journey. Right? When he realizes this, right, he refuses this information, this life information, right, that I have to die too. And when he realizes that, he never realized it before. He's like, no, I am not going to die. I refuse that, right? And so he departs, right? And this is on another level of a journey, like this life journey. He departs to find the antidote to death, right? If only I could find the one man whom the gods made immortal, I would ask him how to overcome death. Right? And this is a common trope, a common pattern we see throughout literature and today. Like, how do we kill death? Right? Can you eradicate death? Like that thing which eradicates us, right? This mystery. And so this is the story. He hears about somebody who was a human and then transformed into an immortal, right? And his name, it's a difficult name. It's Utnapishtim. So look at it carefully and you can break it up. Utnapishtim. All right. He was mentioned in the very beginning of the story, if you remember. Go to the first book, like on the first page. They talk about Gilgamesh searching for Utnapishtim. Okay. Now, it's a cool journey, right, that he goes on. It's very visual. You can really imagine these great things. Like he goes to these gigantic mountains that reach the heavens, right, called the Twin Peaks. And there's two scorpion people there. Very cool. It's like a scorpion husband and wife are like hanging out there, posted at the entrance. And and they're terrifying, right? I mean, very scary scorpion people that their looks could kill an ordinary man. And Gilgamesh is pierced with dread. Remember before, it was like nothing could really scare Gilgamesh, right? He's like empathetic now. He can be scared. He's willing to be afraid, right? He's pierced with dread, right? He steadies himself. He talks to them, and they explain how to get through the Twin Peaks, which is pretty cool, right? He has to, right here, run through the tunnel faster than wind, right? And you have just 12 hours. If you don't emerge from the tunnel before the sun sets and enters the tunnel, you will find no refuge from its deadly fire. Go. Right? I mean, this is like straight from an action film or something like that. It would be very exciting to watch this in a film, right? So this is happening, right? And of course it's Gilgamesh. This is a nice, it feels like a song in itself, right? Gilgamesh entered, for 1 hour he ran, deep was the darkness, third hour, fourth hour, fifth he ran. Repeats itself. And of course he makes it. And in the other side is this other world, which is amazing. It's beautiful, right? Before him, the garden of gods appeared, right? With gem trees of all colors, dazzling to see, right? There were trees that grew rubies, trees with lapis lazuli flowers, trees that dangled gigantic coral clusters like dates. Everywhere, sparkling on all the branches, were enormous jewels, emeralds, sapphires, hematite, diamonds, carnelians, pearls. Gilgamesh looked up and marveled at it all. Right? So just imagine this world. This seems incredible. Really incredible. Okay, so we're going to see if we can get through. This will be a book 10, right? And I hope you're keeping up with me. I know I'm kind of moving fast, but we can do this. We can do this. I'll check in. How are you all doing? Levi's keeping up. Good, good. Am I going too fast or too slow? I'm happy to hear feedback. Okay. Excellent. All right, good. I can get from a few of you. Thank you. We will continue then. All right, so this is one of my favorite characters right here, Shiduri. She's the tavern keeper, right? In this crazy, gemstoned world, right? She owns, a bar, right? She's got a bar there, and that's like the first place he comes across. It's a tavern, right? And of course, when she sees Gilgamesh, he looks terrifying, right? He's not like his original civilized self, right? In nice clothing and like jewelry and ointments and, with combed hair. No, he looks like a wild man. She climbs to the roof of her tavern and sort of talks to him from a distance, right? Protecting herself. And, she says, yeah, you seem so wild. I locked my door, climbed to the roof. And they have a conversation. We get a better sense of Gilgamesh's appearance, right? She asks, why are your cheeks so hollow and your features so ravaged? Why is your face frost-chilled, burnt by the desert sun? And he explains, right, his story. He tells her, summarizes basically everything that's happened before. And I highlighted this part because I thought it's good. For 6 days and 7 nights, I mourned him. Right. So for about a week, he mourned him. And we see this occurring again and again and again in the story. Things happen for 6 days and 7 nights. Right. Remember, of course, that's how Enkidu first became human, right? It was with Shamhat for 6 days and 7 nights with her in the forest. That was like his first experience with another human being. And then later we'll see it happening again, actually, coming up. 6 days and 7 nights. Now, like a good bartender, right, a tavern keeper, Chiduri kind of acts like a therapist for Gilgamesh. And they talk about life. It's like, 4,000 years ago, tavern keepers had this job, and they still do today. People go to the bar, they sit at the bar, and talk to the bartender until 4 a.m. about all of life's problems and solutions, right? Not that much different so long ago. Chiduri says, Gilgamesh, where are you roaming? She means this on a very deep level. You will never find the eternal life that you seek. Right? When the gods created mankind, they also created death. And they held back eternal life for themselves alone. Humans are born, they live, then they die. This is the order that the gods have decreed. But until the end comes, enjoy your life. Spend it in happiness, not despair. Savor your food. Make each of your days a delight. Bathe and anoint yourself. Wear bright clothes that are sparkling clean. Let music and dancing fill your house. Love the child who holds you by the hand and give your wife pleasure in your embrace. Right? That is the best way for a man to live. Great advice. And not just for a man, right? But you can easily take this to any human being, right? I don't know, switch this to husband or whatever you want, right? Give your partner pleasure in your embrace, right? That's the best way for a human to live. It's good advice, isn't it? It's something we often forget with all these pressures of financial pressures, of school pressures, of job, work, right? Responsibilities. All important things in life. But we have to remember, right, that this is all you got, right? Right? In terms of this living life. Right? And here are some ways to enjoy yourself during this time. And there's simple pleasures, right? This isn't like metaphysical stuff here. It's not even deeply spiritual. It's like savor your food, right? Taste it. Enjoy the food you eat, right? And being clean, right? That you can even do that is a pleasure, right? And let music and dancing fill your house. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Of course, Gilgamesh, he's so sad, he's depressed, he's mourning, he can't hear that. Right? And if you've had a friend or a family member that has been, suffered through depression, right? Or even if you yourself has, and people just tell you, you're right, hey, just savory of food, make each of your days a delight, bathe and anoint yourself, you'll be happy. It's like, of course, you're like, what? You don't get it, right? You don't get it. And that's how Gilgamesh is. I mean, he is feeling very low right now. So he doesn't get this. Like, my Enkidu died. You can't just tell me this, right? It's not good advice. It's not help, right? Now, he learns later that in the end, it is, right? And we must mourn if we're going through this. We must. Now, she does tell him, okay, well, you can go to Urshanabi, and he is Utnapishtim's boatman. And we find Urshanabi actually becomes his friend, which is cool, right? But she just says, all right, this is how you can get to Utnapishtim. Go ahead, all right? So let's see, I only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to skip over a couple things. Of course, Urshanabi he has a boat to get to Utnapishtim, right? And his crew is made of stone men. When Gilgamesh sees them, he just smashes them to pieces. He meets Urshanabi and says, well, I would take you to Utnapishtim, except you killed all my stone men. Why did you do that? And anyway, they figure out a way to get past the waters of death. Like if you touch them, you die. Right? They figure out a way to get past that, sort of by using poles. All right. They find Utnapishtim, and again, Gilgamesh repeats his story, right, about who he is, how he came to be there, and he must now overcome death. And Utnapishtim also gives him great advice, right? Why prolong your grief, right? In other words, if you were immortal, you would have to grieve for all eternity, right? Have you ever paused to compare your own blessed lots with the fools? Right? You were made from the flesh of both gods and humans. Right? The gods have lavished you with their gifts as if they were fathers and mothers, right? You could rule over men, right? They gave you beer dregs instead of butter, right? So all the great food, the great clothing. Can't you see how fortunate you are? Right? And Utnapishtim's right. Right? Yes, Gilgamesh is going through a hard time, right? But he's a very fortunate person. He has a roof over his head, and it's a beautiful roof too. It's not just functional stuff, it's also beautiful things, like nice quality of everything. So he does tell him, right, that your answer isn't immortal life. That's not what you're really seeking for. Life is short, and in any moment it can be snapped like the reed in a canebrake. Right. So I hope you read these very closely and read it again, right? It's really good stuff. I'll just read this last bit right here. Utnapishtim says, the river rises, flows over its banks, and carries us all away like mayflies floating downstream. They stare at the sun, then all at once there is nothing. Okay, and now this is the last book, and this is the most famous book. Right? This is the most famous book. It's the story of the flood, and when Gilgamesh was first discovered, this was the only one that anyone actually cared about. It wasn't for much longer before until the people started appreciating the whole story. This is the tablet itself that the flood was written on, that where we get the story. And it's like in the British Museum, right? Because they stole everything. Okay. All right, so let's go through the story. And yeah, we can do it. All right. So Gilgamesh asks Utnapishtim to tell him the story. How did you transform from human to immortal? And Utnapishtim says, yeah, sure, I'll tell you. He was a king once, and that's when the great gods decided to send the flood. Right? Now, the gods gave an oath not to tell anyone, but one god, right, Ea, a very clever god, whispered the truth to a fence of reeds, right? And reeds, like, that grow naturally by a river. And Utnapishtim overheard the secret, right? And so it's all about Ea, this god right here, Ea, right? Whispered it, and he let, the secret out and told Utnapishtim to build a great ship, leave your possessions, save your life. And he even told him how to build it. He gave him a blueprint, right? The ship must be square so that its length equals its width. Build a roof over it, just as the great deep is covered by the earth. Then gather and take aboard the ship examples of every living creature, right? We already talked about this, but very, very similar to Noah and the ark, right? And yeah, okay. So some major differences, though, and we'll look at those. Okay. So the rest of this, they kind of just go into detail about how he built the boat and exactly how many compartments it has and all of these kind of things. And then finally, Shamhash announced the time had come. Enter the ship now, seal the hatch. And Utnapishtim says, I gazed at the sky and it was terrifying. An immense black cloud rose on the horizon, crossed the sky. He says, all day ceaselessly, the storm winds blew, the rain fell, then the flood burst forth, right? Overwhelming the people like war, right? Even the gods were afraid. And they did this, right? The water rose higher and higher, right? Until the gods fled to Anu's palace in the highest heaven, right? So this flood is rising so high, it's flooding heaven. Right? So the gods, I don't believe, probably did not expect this. They're like, oh shoot, Okay, so they go to Anu's palace, right? Anu shut the gates, and the gods cowered by the palace wall like dogs. Right? So this is not good for the gods. Right? They're trying to eradicate humans. Now it's kind of getting into their space. And this is very interesting. Gods are likened to dogs. Okay. Now, let's see. There's prayers. Again, for 6 days and 7 nights, the storm demolished the earth until there was no life at all. The human race had turned into clay, right? And we use a similar metaphor, where people do these, in cultures today of death is going back to dust, right? You came from dust and you go back to dust. You came from earth and you go back to earth. This kind of concept has been around a very, very long time. Now, this is also very interesting, and for those familiar with the biblical story, we'll see similarities as well. So when the flood is over, the ship ran aground on the top of a mountain. So you can imagine a mountain, it's flooded, the very tip of the mountain, the ship hit, right? And so they're at the top of it. So they can't get out. I mean, they're kind of stuck, right? And it's just water everywhere, right? So they send out birds, right? First a dove, but the dove couldn't find land, so came back to the ship. Okay, so then they let out a swallow, right? It couldn't find land, so they came back. But then they let out a raven, right? And because the water had receded, it found a branch and it sat there, right? It ate, it flew off, and it didn't return, right? So that was a good sign. They're like, oh, good, the bird did not return. That means it found somewhere else to live. That's a sign that we can find somewhere else to live. He lets the animals free. Now, this is important, okay? Utnapishtim. Oh, sorry, I'm glitching here. Cool. All right, here we are. Okay, here we are. Utnapishtim makes an offering for the gods right here. He slaughters a sheep on the mountaintop and offered it to the gods. Now, the gods haven't had an offering for weeks, right? Now, the gods smell the fragrance of the offering, the sweet fragrance, and they clustered around the offering like flies. Right? Now, the gods were likened to dogs earlier when they were afraid of the flood, and now they're like flies. Right? So we get a sense that the gods need humans just as humans need the gods. It's a symbiotic sort of relationship. And it was a mistake for the gods to decide to try to get rid of all these humans because they needed the offerings. Otherwise, they might have died too. So very interesting, this description here. In any case, just to sort of get to the end of this, Utnapishtim, he has to be punished for this because he's the only human living. And to punish him for, in a sense, they gave him immortal life, right? So that's interesting. That's his punishment. It's not a reward, like, oh, you fooled us or something. It's his punishment is that now he's not allowed to die, right? So him and his wife are now immortal. So that's how he became human to immortal. And he says to Gilgamesh, well, okay, so that's what we did. Who will assemble the gods for your sake, right? Who will convince them to grant you the eternal life that you seek? Suggesting no one. None of the gods are going to do that for you, right? And they test him almost playfully. Just stay awake for 7 days, right? They test you, prevail against sleep, and perhaps you'll prevail against death. I love this. Gilgamesh sat down against a wall. The moment he sat down, the sleep swirled over him like a fog. He fell asleep right away. The guy's exhausted. He's been adventuring for a long time. He says some rough stuff happen, and so on. Anyway, he wakes up, and they prove to him with this bread that he stayed asleep for a week. And when he wakes up, we have Gilgamesh. He cries out, "What shall I do? Where shall I go now? Death has caught me. It lurks in my bedroom, and everywhere I look, everywhere I turn, there's only death." Right? So now we definitely, right here, Gilgamesh is at his lowest point. Right? He was fighting to beat death, right? To become immortal. He realized you can't go lower than that, right? So this is mythologically rock bottom for Gilgamesh, okay? How is he going to get out of this? Well, remember when you leave the unknown world and go back to the known world, you often get a reward, right? They give you something, right, to take back home, a souvenir, right? Even tourists like to bring back some kind of something from at least a T-shirt, right? Even if it wasn't a great experience. Utnapishtim's wife, she's nice. She says, well, anyway, they clean him up, right? They clean him up. The wife of Utnapishtim said, wait, this man has come a very long way. Won't you give him something for the journey home? Now, they say there's a small, right here at the bottom, spiny bush that grows in the waters, right? And basically, if you eat it, you become young again. Okay, it's not immortal life, but it's, you nibble on it and it refreshes your life. Eventually, you'll eat it all. You'll still die, but you can do that. He finds the plant. And we're already at the end of the story. He finds the plant. Hooray, he got his reward, right? The antidote to the fear of death. And he's with Urshanabi, the boatsman from before, and he tells him, I will eat some myself and become a carefree young man again. So, he's pleased with that. And he goes to, take a bath, basically, in a pond of cool water. He leaves the plant on the ground, and a snake comes, smells its fragrance. It crawled up and carried the plant away. So a snake stole it from Gilgamesh. As it disappeared, it cast off its skin, right? It became young again, which is awesome. Now Gilgamesh has nothing. They return home. And he says, I have gained no benefit for myself and lost the marvelous plant. What kind of story is that, right? Nothing has happened. All right. So here's the very ending. He arrives with his new friend, Urshanabi, and he says to him, this is the wall of Uruk, which no city on earth can equal. See how its ramparts gleam like copper in the sun. Climb the stone staircase, more ancient than the mind can imagine. Approach the Eanna temple, sacred to Ishtar, a temple that no king has equaled in size or beauty. Walk on the wall of Uruk. Follow its course around the city. Inspect its mighty foundations. Examine its brickwork, how masterfully it's built. Right? Observe the land that it encloses. The palm trees, gardens, orchards, the glorious palaces and temples, the shops, the marketplaces, the houses, the public squares. And that's the end. Right? So I know this is, class time is over. So I'll just point you in one direction, right? And the rest will be up to you to really decide, right? In the end, did he get a reward? What was the reward? Why was he all of a sudden so thrilled about Uruk? He really appreciated just the beauty of it, mesmerized, right? And wanted to tell his new friend all about this city. Has Gilgamesh changed? He says himself, I have gained nothing. But is that really true? What has Gilgamesh gained in this story, right? What has he lost? And in what way, metaphorically, has he been reborn? He is a new Gilgamesh. Right? And you might have noticed that the end of the story was the exact same as the prologue. So the end and the beginning literally just repeat itself, as if we just started the story again.